To some, Spider-Man is the greatest superhero of all time, and even if you don't agree with that statement, there is no disputing that old Webhead is at least in the conversation. For readers, Spider-Man is simply their hero, but while the famed creation of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko usually manages to do the right thing and save the day, regardless of what the odds are, it's not always been plain sailing for Spidey. In fact, there have been an alarming number of times where Spider-Man has made some horrendous decisions or done some completely effed up things. With that in mind, I'm Will for What Culture, and here are the 9 most messed up things Spider-Man has ever done. 9. Attempting to kill Sin Eater and fighting Daredevil. The death of Jean DeWolff. The death of Jean DeWolff came in the middle of a rough few years for Spider-Man. To give some context, Jean was a police captain who Spidey had become close with in the years prior to David and Buckley's 1985 tale. As you may have guessed by the title, the arc saw the death of Jean DeWolff. The mysterious Sin Eater would be the person behind this murder, and even more alarming for Spidey was the fact that the Sin Eater now had his sights set on Betty Brant. After Betty had managed to keep this villain at arm's length momentarily, Webhead swung in to save the day and put a stop to Sin Eater. Where the surprising and messed up element of this comes into play though, is that Spider-Man doesn't just take Sin Eater down in the way that all good heroes take down their rogues gallery. No, instead Spider-Man beats Sin Eater into unconsciousness and then keeps on pounding down his knocked out foe. To make matters worse, Daredevil has to step in to stop Spider-Man from killing Sin Eater, and then Spider-Man and Daredevil end up fighting over that. 8. He ate Mary Jane. Marvel Zombies. Cannibalism is not cool, let alone when it involves devouring your one true love and then following up that main course with a dessert of your dear old aunt. But that's exactly what happened in the Earth 2149 realm that contains the Marvel Zombies. After being bitten by zombie Captain America, Peter tries his best to hold back the urges that begin to take over his virus-riddled body. Unfortunately for Mary Jane, the infection is too strong and he instead ends up eating MJ. Not only that, but Spider-Man's hunger for human flesh sees him then turn his attention to Aunt May, with Mary Jane herself turning into a zombie, who Peter then kills, so he can keep the tasty delights of Aunt May's rotting corpse to himself. 7. His role in Gwen's death. The night Gwen Stacy died. The death of Gwen Stacy is one of the most important events in the history of comics. For Spidey, not only did this tale see the love of his life die, the story went one further and had Spider-Man technically be the person responsible for the blow that ultimately killed Gwen. Of course, Spidey was given a near unwinnable deck of cards to play with when the Green Goblin threw Gwen off the George Washington Bridge. The Wallcrawler's only chance of saving her was to try and catch her with his webbing, but the impact of Spider-Man's webbing hitting the falling Stacy was met by the eerie snap of Gwen's neck. 6. Sleeping with a married Betty Brant. Mayhem by Moonlight. This act occurred in The Amazing Spider-Man 189, but it was the climax, if you'll pardon the pun, of a story that began several weeks before in The Amazing Spider-Man 183. The situation at play was one that saw Peter supposedly sleep with the recently married Betty Brant. Let's have a rundown of what happened. 1. Betty Brant and Ned Leeds get married. 2. Peter finds Betty in his apartment after she skipped out on her own honeymoon. 3. Betty declares that Ned is too busy for her and that she instead wants to be with Peter. 4. After a few issues of wrestling with the situation, Peter and Betty kiss before spending a couple of hours getting up to, well, having some fun. 5. A pissed off Ned turns up to confront Peter about stealing his wife. 6. Peter acts like a massive douche to Betty in order to force her back to her husband. And there it is. Every single person, bar Ned Leeds, comes out of this looking bad. And Peter in particular looked like a douche for how he strung along a married woman despite him only really caring about Mary Jane. 5. Nearly killing RHINO. Spider-Man the Animated Series. Fox's Spider-Man the Animated Series still holds up to this day as one of the truly great animated superhero shows. The show wasn't afraid to push where Spidey could go as a character. Case in point, the time a symbiote-influenced Peter Parker came extremely close to murdering RHINO. After old Webhead looks to put a stop to RHINO's quest to find Prometheum X, audiences were shocked to see the more aggressive edge displayed by Spider-Man. After declaring that he'd given up on being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, the Wallcrawler has RHINO cowering and pleading to be put in jail. Thankfully, a timely flashback to recent interactions with Aunt May and Felicia Hardy snaps Spider-Man out of his funk, with this being the moment that Peter realizes maybe the swanky new black suit might not be all it's cracked up to be. 4. Siding with Stark, Civil War. The original Civil War comic book arc was designed for each of the two rival sides to have valid points and reasoning for taking their respective stances. Despite that intention, it was Tony Stark and his allies who came out of Civil War looking like jackasses. And of course, as we all know, one of the many who was by the side of Stark was Spider-Man. Won over by Tony's charm and the benefits of having Iron Man's advanced technology to play with, Spidey wouldn't just side with old Shellhead, but it'd even go further and allow himself to be cajoled into a public unmasking that served no purpose apart from being a propaganda tool for Stark's crusade. Spidey would partially redeem himself by changing his allegiance to Captain America shortly after the unmasking, although he was still difficult to forgive for his actions while on the indisputably wrong side. 3. Going public, Civil War. To elaborate a little more on the Civil War unmasking of Spider-Man, this was something that was baffling on so many levels. On a character level, this was something that went against so much of what we'd come to see as the fundamental characteristics of who Spider-Man is, and even the most naive and positive of readers were able to see that no good would come of this unmasking. As it happened, it didn't take long for this decision to come back and bite Spider-Man hard, with Aunt May fatally shot by a hired gun of the Kingpin. May would ultimately survive the gunshot that should have killed her, but that survival came at an almighty cost. 2. He gave up Stark's swanky specs. Spider-Man Far From Home. In Far From Home, Jake Gyllenhaal is at his most charming as Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio. While one could appreciate how the landscape has changed in a post-Endgame world, it's easy to see how Peter and even the quote-unquote Nick Fury could be swept up as the world needs to find new heroes, and Mysterio seems like just the guy. Still, there is no getting around how messed up it is that Spidey hands over the tech within the Edith glasses so easily and without any consideration for the potential fallout of such a decision. After all, he's only known Mysterio for like 2 days? Come on bro, that was a bad move, and it nearly cost Peter and his closest friends their lives. 1. Sacrificing his marriage. One more day. To this day, the mere mention of the words "one more day" will send a cold shiver down the spines of so many true believers, with it being the most stupid, ridiculous, and outright awful Spider-Man stories that ever made it to print. Coming off the back of the first Civil War arc, One More Day had Peter make a deal with the literal devil of Marvel Comics. That devil would be Mephisto, and Peter would agree for his marriage to Mary Jane to be wiped from history in order for Mephisto to save Aunt May's life and erase the world's knowledge that Peter and Spider-Man were one of the same. Seeing Peter and MJ opting to scrap their marriage in this way felt disrespectful to these characters and their histories, and it made Spider-Man seem utterly selfish. Adding salt to the wounds, after this deal is agreed, Mephisto shows Peter and MJ the daughter they would have had they stayed together, in the world's worst "here's what you could have won" twist ever. Yikes. And there you have it folks, the 9 worst things Spider-Man has ever done. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and drop me a follow on Twitter at YouSlyDogU. I'm Will for What Culture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.